Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Decoding the Unknown, the show where we decode things. One of my writers, in this case Kevin, has written me a script I've never read it before. It's all about Jennifer Fergate, the Oslo Plaza woman. I know absolutely nothing about this, but over the next, trying to eyeball the length of this from the script, 90 minutes, 2 hours, maybe less, who knows? We're gonna decode. Let's jump in, shall we? It was 7:50 p.m. Saturday, the 3rd of June. 1995. The security guard knocked on the door of room 2805, but instead of the occupant answering the door, the guard instead heard the unmistakable sound of a gun being fired. He took cover in an alcove, eventually taking the elevator downstairs to get the head of security for assistance. Bruh. Someone shot at me through the door when I knocked on it. Do you want to go get head of security or just immediately call the police? Just immediately call the police. What's going on? Oh, it was 1995 though, so maybe he didn't have a mobile phone. Probably not, right? So he'd have to go downstairs and find someone to call the police, right?
Maybe.
You know, it feels like we've been here before, Simon. It's a lot like the murder room in 1046, in which mysterious John Doe was found inside his hotel room having been shot. However, today's story about the death in room 2805 departs from the previous tale in a number of significant ways. I mean, I'm sure people are found dead in hotel rooms all the time. Like, don't people go to hotels sometimes to they like check into a nice hotel and be like, this is where I'm going to end it all? Super grim. I wouldn't like to work in a hotel. You just be like, housekeeping. You just go like blood splatter. You must see dead people being a housekeeper, right? My mother-in-law runs a guest house, and some dude like just died. Like died in a guest house. And it's like, oh. So the police come, they check him out. It's like, nah, he's just dead. Nothing weird. Just a guy who died. Like, hell though. Jesus. Just before we continue with today's video, I want to say that it's brought to you by Keeps. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, Simon, you are a bald man. But that doesn't mean that I can't help look out for my fellow follically challenged friends. Keeps is all about keeping your hair where it belongs. Unless it's too late for someone like me. With Keeps, you can kiss those awkward doctor's office visits goodbye. Say hello to professional care from the comfort of your own home. Just hop online, complete a consultation, and boom! You're matched with a personalized treatment plan delivered discreetly to your door. And the best part, you can adjust, pause, or cancel your plan anytime. Keeps offers treatments that are clinically proven to work, whether you're preventing hair loss, stimulating growth, or just taking better care of what you've got. And check this out. The products aren't run-of-the-mill shampoos and conditioners. They're specifically formulated to complement your treatment plan and make thinning hair look thicker. Keeps is loved and trusted by over 1 million men, just like you. With thousands of 5-star reviews, you know you're in good hands. Plus, they've got your back with 24/7 support and discreet packaging, so no one has to know your secrets. So whether you're fighting hair loss or just want to keep your mane in tip-top shape, Keeps have got you covered. Thanks to Keeps for sponsoring this video, and for a special offer, go to keeps.com/Simon or click the link in the description below. That's keeps.com/Simon. That's me. Let's keep those heads nice and hairy, shall we, gents? And now back to today's video. To start, this time around, the victim is a Jane Doe rather than a John Doe. This case also took place in 1995 rather than 1935, so there's a lot more evidence and forensics, though as you'll soon discover, not nearly as much as there should be. But the biggest difference between these two cases is that while the police knew Artemis Ogletree was clearly murdered in room 1046, police in this case started with a 99.9% degree of certainty that today's Jane Doe took her own life. And not a goddamn person believes that story. Okay. Well, why were they so sure at the beginning then? I like a good mystery. I mean, that's why I do this channel, isn't it? So come join me in an adventure involving fake identities, unexplainable details, potential communist spies, half-eaten bratwurst, and an allegedly self-inflicted injury that's even less convincing than Jeffrey Epstein's. Yeah, I love that one. It's always like, he shot himself in the head twice. In the back of the head twice. It's so good. It's like that Boeing dude. It was like, if I turn up dead, it's not an accident. If I turn up dead, it's not suicide. And then the guy turns up dead from suicide. What are you up to, Boeing, allegedly? Checking into the hotel. It all began on May the 22nd at the Radisson Blu Plaza Hotel, known locally as the Oslo Plaza. If I was going to end it all. It's such a grim thought, isn't it? Like, thinking about this. But it does happen. It's like, I don't think the Radisson Blu, if it's like the last thing I'm going to do, it's like, oh, yeah. Not even a regular Radisson. The Radisson Blu. That's the worst one, right? That's it's like the Marriott Courtyard. Ugh. Marriott Courtyard. So why even call it a Marriott? Marriott has like something of a mid-tier vibe. And then you're just like, yeah, Marriott Courtyard. Basically a nice 2-star hotel. This was the #1 luxury hotel in Oslo, perhaps all of Norway. If I got this wrong, I thought Radisson Blue was like the version of Radisson. Maybe I've got it the wrong way around. Maybe Radisson Blue is the nice one. I'm going to look that up right now. Radisson Blue. Oh, maybe Radisson Blue's the nice one. I'm sorry, I'm mistaken then.
I'm sorry.
Maybe. It's a hard thing to Google, isn't it? My bad. I'm sorry, Radisson. You make lovely places. A 37 stories tall, it's the second tallest building in all of Norway, and a footbridge connects the hotel to Oslo Spectrum Arena. The Spectrum is famous for hosting the Nobel Peace Prize concert every year, as well as for hosting the Eurovision Song Contest multiple times. Sadly, it was not the location of Eurovision 2010 when the world was first introduced to Epic Sax Guy. There's a reference I don't get. Anyway, the Oslo Plaza was really big deal. It was frequently host to celebrities and foreign heads of state. Okay, never mind. Apparently it's awesome. Radisson Blue. Where is that? And the 5-star hotel was officially opened by none other than King Olav V himself. It was the pinnacle of luxury accommodation in Oslo and was conveniently within walking distance of much of the city. And on May the 22nd, hotel reception received a call from a woman looking to book a room. The woman spoke in perfect English with no discernible accent, though it's unclear what day the reservation was originally for. It's an everyday part of reception's job to take these calls, so I wouldn't have expected whoever answered the phone that day to remember it weeks later. I'm honestly shocked they remember she spoke English, unless receiving calls from English speakers was particularly noteworthy. Or maybe it was just standard practice to note what language a phone call was in, since this seems to have been a major destination for international travelers. But the reason we don't know the original date is that the woman called back in on Wednesday, May the 31st to change her reservation. At least we assume it was the same woman, but anything is possible with this case. This time, she was speaking fluent German, and the person answering the phone call believed she had an Eastern European accent. She was calling to let them know that she wanted to check into the hotel that night. Wait, that's quite impressive. So, a Norwegian person is answering the phone to someone speaking German, and they can tell that person has an accent. Oh my god, that's quite something, isn't it? To tell someone's got an accent in a language that you don't speak as your first language. She was calling to let them know that she wanted to check into the hotel that night and that there would be another guest joining in her room. The names were recorded as Jennifer and Lois Fergate. In this context, Lois was being used as a man's name, and as far as I can tell, it's supposed to be pronounced like Lewis. Okay, there we go. From now on, Lewis. It's spelled Lois, like Lois. Around 10:40 p.m., Jennifer arrived to check into the hotel. She was described as being short, about 5'2", with blue eyes, having short dark hair in a sort of pixie cut, and wearing a long black leather jacket. She would also write down a date of birth that would have made her 21 years old, but she was 21 in the same way that most guys on Tinder are 6 feet tall. Jennifer was greeted by receptionist Sasha Anundsen, who gave her the following card to fill out. Okay, so there's a picture of a card. It looks very 90s. Like, I don't think you get these anymore, do you? I guess you do sometimes, like when you check in. But normally they'll have all the details printed out ahead of time, right? Because everyone wants to check in online rather than filling out that reception. Because the reservation was made over the phone, you see that some of the information was typed onto the card. Oh, there we go. Some of it is. There you go. It looks like it was printed like on an old school dot matrix printer. This has led to a lot of confusion over Jennifer's name, with different articles using Fergate or Fergate interchangeably. Well, it clearly states here Fergate. The spelling was just a oh, okay, so her name is actually Fergate, but on here it's spelt Fergate. Yeah, I don't know, look, saying the name Whistler over the phone, people are always like, oh, hello, Mr. Westman, and I'm like, who? It's rarely correct. But Jennifer signed her name as Fergate multiple times, so it's assumed that this is the correct spelling. It's also largely irrelevant, since if you haven't guessed by me referring to her as a Jane Doe at the beginning of the episode, it's not like this was even her real name. But clerical errors aside, this is where things already start to get a bit strange. Sasha claimed that Jennifer was checking in alone, but the head receptionist, E.I. Gudgertsen, I'm sorry Norwegians about that pronunciation, Evie Gudgertsen, Evie Gudgertsen, told a different story. Evie has remained confident for over 2 decades that there was a man with Jennifer at check-in, the mysterious Lewis. She described him as tall, maybe 6'1", with dark hair, and roughly 35 to 40 years old. That's not the only thing that Sasha and Evie disagreed about either. We'll come back to some of the other details later, but there are a couple of very notable things on that registration card as it concerns Jennifer's original check-in. Sasha marked X's in pen on the fields that Jennifer was supposed to fill out, but she left her passport number and issuing passport authority both blank. The card is also marked as Jennifer having paid for the room in cash. Oh yeah, okay, so that's just missing information. However, even when a room is paid in cash, it's standard procedure for the hotel to request a card to be put on file for incidentals. This allows the hotel to charge you for any expenses incurred that weren't part of the original room charge, such as a room service, eating snacks out of the minibar, or taking a sledgehammer to the walls like an arsehole. And yet this didn't happen. Despite this being a premier luxury hotel, Jennifer was able to check in without providing a credit card or any form of identification. Even shitty hotels require these things and have for decades, and it was official hotel policy to do so. So how was this even possible? Well, when you pay for incidentals, right, they've just put a block on your card for like $1,000 or whatever. And then if you take anything, then they take the money off and then they release the hold. So couldn't you just give them assuming you just big cash person, just give them cash, just give them $1,000 in cash, which I mean is a lot, but couldn't you do that? I've never done it because I was just I'm not a criminal, so I'll just use a bank card like a normal person. According to Evie, it shouldn't have been. She stated, "It's incomprehensible to me. We had strict routines at the hotel. It just shouldn't be possible." But Sasha claimed that this sort of shit happened all the time. Jennifer had arrived at the hotel late in the evening, just after the final flights for 3 major airlines each touched down at the nearby international airport almost simultaneously. This unfortunate circumstance of airline scheduling meant that the hotel lobby was far busier than a typical Wednesday. Yeah, but they're still going to go through the procedures. They're still going to be like, and a bank card and a passport, please. As Sasha stated with regards to how Jennifer could get through reception without an ID or credit card, it was all about assigning rooms as quickly as possible. We mustn't keep the guests waiting. That's very different from what Evie said, so how can we reconcile these two statements? A lot of people seem to get really hung up on this, suggesting that either Evie or Sasha were part of a larger conspiracy, but I can explain the different responses really easily. If you've ever worked for a giant customer-facing organization, I'm sure you can as well. Back when I was a butcher for a massive heartless corporation that shall remain nameless, we would grind beef daily that was labeled as being 85% lean. If you were to ask the manager if we tested the ground beef to ensure it contained no more than 15% fat, he would tell you that of course we tested every single grind. It was corporate policy. But if you were to ask me or one of my buddies, I would answer, of course not. Ain't nobody got time for that shit. We just eyeballed it, and if it looked too fatty, we'd throw in a bag of Pecs to lean it out. In the 5 years I was with the company, the ground beef tester was used exactly once, and that was only because my buddy and I made a bet about the fat content of a particular grind. Now I'm curious about what it actually came out at. It's 70% fat. In summary, I think these differing statements are a red herring. In all likelihood, Sasha was telling the truth to investigators because there was a dead body involved, while Evie continued to toe the company line to protect her lower management position. It's completely reasonable that, given the alleged unspoken policy of moving the line as fast as possible, Sasha just decided to accept cash payment and not worry about ID. After all, if the hotel room was already paid for in cash, then who cares what her real name was? It's not like they had to worry that she was using a stolen credit card or something. No, but there's probably a governmental policy about getting someone's ID when they check into a hotel. It's probably a legal requirement beyond just hotel policy, right? Now we'll come back to the rest of the registration card later, but there is one thing I want to address quickly because, as I believe every single other source represents this inaccurately, the price on the card for Jennifer's stay was 1,845 krona per night. Adjusted for inflation to 2024 currency, that comes out to 3,600 krona, or about $340. That is how every source I can find describes the price, and it's technically accurate, but something felt off. Yeah, it does. If this is I don't know, this feels like normal for a decent hotel, but for the best hotel in Norway, feels pretty cheap. Norway's expensive. I know the luxury hotels in Europe are less expensive than in the US. Yeah, they are. US is crazy. I stayed in a crappy Sheraton one time, and it was $300 a night, and it was crap. But this was Norway's premier hotel at the time. The price felt too cheap, so I looked at the exchange rates. It turns out that the krona was a lot stronger in 1995 than it is today. On June the 1st, 1995, the exchange rate was 6.35 krona to the dollar. Today, it's 10.75 krona to the dollar. This means that a room at the Oslo Plaza in 1995 was $290, or almost $590 today. That price makes a lot more sense for a hotel that was housing heads of state, and I got to have a little fun doing maths, so this tangent was a win-win. Very nice. Yeah, that feels much more normal, doesn't it? $600 for a super nice hotel. Yeah, that's good. It's a good deal. Back on track, Jennifer received 2 key cards for the room, one for her and one for Lewis, who may or may not have been standing next to her this whole time. But because this was a fancy hotel, they had a log system that tracked every time a guest's key card was used to access their room. This means we know exactly when and how many times Jennifer used her key card. However, the system only logged instances in which the key card was used. If 2 people were staying in the same room, one could open the door for the other, and there would be no log of it. More importantly, there was no way to know when somebody left their room, only when they returned. That said, we can use the keycard log to attempt to build a timeline for Jennifer during her stay. This is obviously a very limited amount of information to work with, but I'm a firm believer in less is more in many circumstances. And it's actually the lack of information in the log that raises one of the most interesting questions: establishing a timeline. Jennifer began checking in at 10:40 p.m. on Wednesday night, and her keycard was first used to enter room 2805 at 10:44 p.m. It was used one more time that night at 12:21 a.m., though both Sasha and Evie claimed to have seen Jennifer during this time period. Evie insisted that she saw Jennifer standing with a man by the hotel's currency exchange. She believes they were exchanging US dollars for krona, but she wasn't absolutely certain on what currency they were handing in. Evie also wasn't sure whether or not it was the same man who had been standing beside Jennifer during check-in, but she was 100% confident that there was a man with her. Sasha, on the other hand, saw Jennifer standing alone by the elevators while he was checking in other guests. These two statements don't necessarily contradict each other. It's possible that she was standing at the currency exchange with someone who then didn't go up to her room with her. In fact, I'd wager this is incredibly possible, as most people I've conducted business with then don't come up to my hotel room. Yes, there doesn't seem to be any mystery here. This seems to be completely standard. Or maybe she was waiting at the elevator for the man who then went to the currency exchange with her and they retired to the same room together. I mean, less likely, but possible. Still, again, nothing super weird. Regardless, assuming Evie's memory was correct, then this brief trip out of Jennifer's hotel room that night was easily explained as getting the necessary currency for whatever she had planned during her trip. However, as this was the last time anyone would see a man with Jennifer, and both times it was only Evie that saw him, as far as we know, the mysterious Lewis never actually existed. It certainly didn't appear as if he was sharing a room with her. The next time Jennifer's keycard was used was at 8:34 a.m. the next morning, Thursday. Given the time of day, it's assumed that she'd just left to have some breakfast, but nobody saw Jennifer enter or leave her room, nor did anybody remember seeing her at breakfast at the hotel. I mean, people don't... When I'm in a hotel, usually the hallways are pretty empty. It's like... I mean, of course you bump into people, but generally when you leave your room, it's not like there are other people, around that often who'd even remember, right? They're not that busy. And even if they are busy, people aren't just in and out of their rooms all the time. There was no reason for anyone to be keeping an eye on her specifically, so unless she had been disappointed with the breakfast options and gone full Karen on the staff, it's not a surprise nobody would remember if she was there. Of course, she may also have left the hotel entirely and had breakfast somewhere else. Now, here is where things start to get strange. Sometime that morning, Jennifer went to the hotel receptionist to extend her stay. She had originally booked 2 nights, but she wanted to extend her stay until Sunday. This wasn't an unusual request. The receptionist changed her booking to add 2 more days and gave Jennifer 2 new keycards, as the originals were programmed to stop working the next day. Once again, Jennifer was not asked for a credit card or ID, but I don't think that's as strange as most sources seem to. Although we discussed why she may have been able to originally check in without providing these details, it's still highly unusual and against corporate policy for this to have happened. As such, whoever extended Jennifer's reservation would have just assumed that these things were already on file. Obviously don't have access to the software that the hotel was using back in 1995, but I would be shocked if updating the checkout date required the receptionist to update or even look at the payment information on file. Who knows? Maybe I'm just not being hard enough on the staff. No, I think that's extremely reasonable. You just be like, I'd like to extend my stay, and they're like, okay, can I have some money? And you give them money and you're done. But even if I'm willing to explain away her ability to once again deal with reception without showing an ID or credit card, it was the use of this new keycard that really raises questions. Room 2805 was next opened 3 times between 12:44 and 12:50 p.m. But it wasn't by Jennifer. It was housekeeping using their keycards to open the door. When they entered the room, it was empty. There was no Jennifer and no Lewis, though the latter should go without saying, as I already said that nobody saw him. There were 2 housekeepers tidying up the room that day. Vigdis Varlo was in charge and had been with the hotel for some time, but she also had a 19-year-old trainee with her. Vigdis had been one of the people to prepare the room the day before, and because there were supposed to be 2 people staying in the room, it was standard procedure to provide 2 duvets for the bed. Yes, that's a European thing. However, one of the duvets had been folded and placed off to the side rather than being used. While this is seen as further proof that there was only one person staying in the room, conceptually, I'm a bit confused about the whole thing. A duvet is what we in America generally refer to as a comforter. And I don't see why anyone would expect each person to use their own. Oh, Kevin, that's because you're an American. In Europe, it's quite common for people to have 2 separate duvets and use them separately, and there'll be 2 single duvets. So people will sleep with single duvets on the bed, and it's not a comforter. A comforter's this gross thing that hotels don't wash, that you sleep like a sheet and then a comforter over the top. In Europe, we just sleep with the comforter, but the cover of the comforter is changed every time. I understand that providing a second one may have become standard practice after too many late-night calls to housekeeping from people left in the cold by blanket hogs, but it doesn't seem like using separate blankets would be the default for two people sharing a bed. It is because they're single duvets. Like, at home, because I'm British, like, we generally have, like, one big duvet for two people, but in Czech, they generally have two separate ones, and I think lots of Europe does it the same. And so it would just be two single ones. So this does indicate that there's only one person in the room. Maybe it's some European cultural thing, and Simon has a better explanation for why the unused duvet would be seen as so important. He does. There you go. You're welcome. The more crucial piece of evidence with regards to the bed was that Vigdis observed that only one pillow had been used. That certainly seems more compelling for anyone still entertaining the idea that there was a second person staying in the room with Jennifer. No, I think it's only one person. And the fact that Kevin finds this weird is just like, that's just a European thing, and it just further indicates that there was only one person in the room. Anyway, the used duvet was folded and placed in the closet, and housekeeping did regular cleaning stuff like replacing towels and whatnot. While waiting for her trainee to finish cleaning the bathroom, a pair of shoes caught Vigdis's attention. The clothes Jennifer wore were predominantly black or grey, nothing that would make a person stand out, but these shoes were brightly coloured and extremely pretty, so much so that Vigdis had to take a closer look. She looked inside the shoes to see who they were made by in the hopes of perhaps buying her own pair, but by the time anyone learned this detail and asked her, she had forgotten who made the shoes, and that's assuming she ever got the answer in the first place, for reasons we'll get to later. Oh, have the labels been removed from the clothes? That's some spy shit right there. We don't know exactly what time the housekeepers left the room, but we do know that the room was empty when they arrived. Jennifer wasn't there, but there was no evidence of anybody else staying in the room either, and nobody was going to return to that room for quite a while. The next time Jennifer's keycard was used was 8:50 a.m. on Friday. If you're able to follow along with the timeline, this is very strange. Jennifer used her keycard at 8:30 Thursday morning and not again until 8:50 Friday morning. This means that she left her room, went to reception to extend her reservation by 2 days, and didn't return to her room until 20 to 24 hours later. Yes, that is odd. I'm just putting that timeline together in my head. There's no log of exactly when she visited reception, but she was already gone by the time housekeeping arrived, which meant that Jennifer was gone for a minimum of 20 hours. So, where in the hell was she? Unfortunately, I don't have an answer to that for you. Nobody knows if she had business in Oslo that kept her out all night, or if she spent the night in a different room in the hotel. Jennifer was basically invisible for her entire stay. She was the sort of person that could walk around a crowded building without ever being seen or drawing attention to herself. Some spy right there. That said, a member of staff did see Jennifer open her hotel room that morning. Karin Lovbrot was filling in for Vigdis on the 28th floor that day, and she saw Jennifer walking towards her room. She greeted Jennifer in English, saying good morning, and Jennifer smiled and returned the pleasantry before opening the door to her room. When she got to her room, there was a message waiting for her on the TV. Sometime Thursday afternoon, somebody in reception had finally realized there was no credit card on file for room 2805. At 2:19 p.m, a message was sent that would appear on the TV screen until somebody in the room clicked OK on the remote to acknowledge the message. The message urgently requested that the occupant go see the cashier about their room, and shortly after returning to her room, Jennifer acknowledged the message. Of course, Jennifer was never going to see the cashier about the matter. The cash she had paid for the room no longer covered her extended stay, but Jennifer had a secret weapon up her sleeve. The same hotel employee that saw her first enter her room watched again as she opened the door and placed a Do Not Disturb sign on the handle. They could send all the messages to her TV they wanted, but the hotel was now powerless to come to her room and try to address the situation with her personally. I mean, what could they possibly do? The sign explicitly said Do Not Disturb, so knocking on Jennifer's door and demanding money would violate that simple request. And while I recognize that this sounds completely sarcastic, I'm dead serious. Yeah, hotels generally need to respect that because 99.9% of the time, you're just going to leave and pay for your stay, and them coming up to hassle you for payment at like a luxury hotel, you'd be like, what's up? Like, I'm going to pay for this. You need to stop this. For the time being, so long as Jennifer kept the Do Not Disturb sign on her door, hotel staff weren't going to come and bother her about the money. Jennifer's keycard was used again at 11:03 a.m, but once again it's unknown where she had been or why. All we know is that she didn't go to the cashier to settle her bill. That was the last time her card was used to gain access to the room, so as far as anybody knows, she never left room 2805 again. Yes, but she could have, because there's no log on the way out. Although, we find her body in the room, right? So should have had... Okay, I understand. I'm there. At 8:06 p.m., Jennifer called room service to order a plate of bratwurst and potato salad. The food arrived at 8:23, delivered by Kristen Anderson. Because this was a 5-star hotel, not some cheap dive, the food wasn't just dropped off by the door. It was customary for hotel staff to bring room service into the room and lay the meal out on the table for the guests. Kristen noted how easy this was to do because Jennifer hadn't put anything on the table. She also described the room as being almost sterile. Of course, these statements were all translated for Norwegian, so whatever word Christian used that meant sterile may have had some added nuance that was lost in translation. I only mention that because it seemed like a rather odd word choice, but what the hell do I know? Again, I don't find it that odd. It's just she keeps a very tidy room. However, Kristen also noted that the bed had clearly not been slept in. The hotel had form-fitting sheets, and the beds were made in a very particular way that the guests were unable to replicate. Based on the housekeeper Karen's description, it sounds like the staff could barely handle making the beds the way the management demanded. The bed not being slept in is not necessarily unusual, as Jennifer had only returned to her room that morning. However, since she had been gone from the hotel for 24 hours previously, it meant that she was able to sleep wherever she went, or that she was particularly skilled at going extended periods of time without sleep. Yeah, because you'd assume she's going to take a nap in the day, on the bed. While Kristen may have described the room as sterile, she hadn't thought it was particularly unusual. The empty table made serving dinner easier, but she just assumed that Jennifer was a flight attendant. It was common for flight attendants to stay at the hotel, and unlike regular guests, they never unpacked and spread out their belongings. They were also easily identified because they wore dark suits and had wheeled suitcases, which apparently weren't common yet in 1995, at least not in Oslo. Since Jennifer was wearing a dark suit and a skirt and a wheeled suitcase, her being a flight attendant was a logical assumption to make. Yeah, but then she'd have a credit card and stuff, right? Because it's not... She's just going to have the company card to pay for that, right? Or it's just going to go on an account rather than paying cash. A flight attendant paying cash would be super weird, no? Although this woman isn't the check-in person, she's the person bringing the food, so that's fair that she would make that assumption. Of course, could Kristen's memory about these details really be trusted? She probably delivered food to lots of rooms, and she wouldn't be asked anything about this until over 24 hours later. Yeah, that's not that long of a time, though. Considering she also said that Jennifer had no interest in small talk, what then could have made this interaction notable enough for Kristen to remember? That would be the large tip that Jennifer gave her. Jennifer tipped her a 50 kroner note, which was exceptional. Kristen said, if we got 10 kroner, we thought it was a lot. While 50 kroner was only about $8 at the time, American, which probably doesn't seem memorably generous to our American audience, it's important to remember that this wasn't America. Tipping isn't and wasn't customary in Norway, where employees are instead paid a reasonable wage. Yeah, like, I don't think I'd tip the person who brings me room service. Right? I don't think I'd do that. I guess I'd do that in America because you tip everything in America. You just like slide someone I don't know. I don't even know how much you're supposed to tip on that. How much are you supposed to tip? $10? $20? I don't know. $5?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't know.
Despite the fact that Jennifer clearly had some amount of cash on her, she charged the meal to her room. The fact that room service was unaware she had no form of payment on file only furthers my belief that whoever was working reception the previous morning when she extended her stay had no idea this was the case. I only bring this up again as her ability to get past reception twice without ID or a credit card is a key element in some of the more fringe conspiracy theories surrounding the case that aren't worth getting into. After Kristen had left, Jennifer presumably ate her dinner, or maybe she just let it sit there for 24 hours before eating it, as is the common belief. Okay, but we'll come back to that. At 8:57 p.m. Friday evening, another message was sent to Jennifer's TV telling her to come and see the cashier. It was acknowledged 8 minutes later, but she never went to the cashier. It wasn't until Saturday night that Avi finally became concerned about the situation. The guest in room 2805 had acknowledged 2 requests, but never came down to reception to provide payment for the room. She sent another message to the TV at 7:36 p.m. on Saturday, and it was quickly acknowledged. When Jennifer didn't come downstairs or call, Evie sent someone from reception to the room, but alas, there, hanging on the door, was a big red Do Not Disturb sign. I wonder what the rule is on that. Like, how long do they have to wait before they can be like, hello? And then how long do they have to wait before they go in to make sure everything's okay? The sign acted as a force field, preventing hotel staff from approaching the door, so all the employee could do was return to reception and inform Evie. As a side note, I'm extraordinarily jealous of Jennifer's experience with the hotel. I always hung those signs on my hotel doorknobs, but over 50% of the time, housekeeping just barged right in anyway. Is that an American thing? If you hang that in Europe, they are not disturbing you. I always hang that. Like, if I'm in a hotel for 2 nights or less, I'll always just hang it because I don't want my room being made up. Because I just don't want people, like, going through all my and I just don't need my bed made that badly. Regardless, Evie finally decided it was time to do something. Jennifer had acknowledged, yet ignored 3 requests to come down to the front desk, and the Do Not Disturb sign had been on her door for 2 days straight. Generally, if people kept the signs on their door that long, it meant something was going on in the room that they didn't want people to see, and this usually meant illegal activity. Or just me staying in a hotel, because I don't want people rifling through my shit. Evie called for security to go knock on the door, which is where our story began. Espionage was a 25-year-old student who worked part-time as a security guard at the hotel every 3rd weekend. That is an extremely part-time job. When he knocked on the door at 7:50 p.m. on Saturday evening, he immediately heard the unmistakable sound of a gunshot inside the room. He ducked into an alcove and had contemplated what to do. He knew that there were 2 people registered to the room. Had one of them shot the other? Were they firing at him? Although Espen had a 2-way radio, he opted to take the elevator back to security instead of radioing for help. I don't know, dude. The first thing I'd do is I'd radio for help on my way downstairs. If he used the radio, the entire staff would have heard instead of just the security team. Oh, smart, and he didn't want to cause a panic. Okay, there we go, there's the reason. Espen told the head of security what happened, while also calling the Oslo police. He wanted to find out if they knew anything about Jennifer or Louis Fergate, if they were known dangerous criminals or something similar. Naturally, the police had never heard the names before. They're also foreigners, right? So what are the odds that the police can get access to an international database that quickly? It's 1995. The head of security went up to the room and used his keycard to enter at 8:04 p.m. Wait for the police! What the hell? He noted that the room had been locked from the inside, something that only the security keycards were able to override. The room was dark, but the TV was on. The head of security called out, but there was no response. He took another step forward. He saw a woman lying on the bed in an unnatural position. He also noticed an acrid smell in the sound. Acrid is a very specific word. Yeah, acrid like the smell of a gun that's gone off. And one that is commonly associated with things having been burned, including spent gunpowder. Once again, he called out, but there was no response. The woman's chest remained still, as if she wasn't breathing. The head of security decided that he wasn't going to tempt fate and backed out of the room. He grabbed a phone in the corridor and called the police, who finally arrived about 30 minutes later. That is a weak-ass response time. You're in the center of a city and someone's shot themselves in the room. Surely there'd be... I mean, I know they're dead and all that, but I feel like that would be a rush job. The police spent the next 8 to 9 hours investigating the room before finally releasing it back to the hotel at 5 a.m. on Sunday morning. According to an internal hotel document written by the head of security that evening, the police had stated that they were 99.9% sure that Jennifer took her own life. Whether that percentage changed or not based on later evidence, the death was officially ruled as suicide, and that was pretty much the end of it. After 13 months of waiting for someone to come forward to claim or identify the body, she was eventually buried in an unmarked grave. But did the police get it right? While technically their conclusion is one of the top theories, it's far at the bottom of the list. So let's go over the evidence and inconsistencies and see exactly what we can find out about Jennifer Fergate, if that is even her real name, which it's not. So far, I'm kind of with the police. I mean, I don't know if I'd write it off so easily, but I haven't seen all the evidence and stuff. And so far, it just seems like, yeah, she possibly did kill herself. I'm not sure why people would be immediately skeptical of that. The evidence. First, let's start with the door itself. I mean, there's not a lot of evidence. The big part of the theory that Jennifer took her own life is that the door was double locked. But was it really? That's not the sort of information recorded in the keycard log. So the only evidence that this was the case is the head of security's statement. I'm obviously not calling him a liar, merely suggesting that he might be a liar, or he could have been mistaken. Or maybe the police wanted him to make that statement so the case could be tied up in a neat little bow. Don't do that, police. Do your job. Okay, that's sounding a bit conspiratorial, but there's a bit more to it than that. Even if the head of security was correct that the door had been locked from the inside, it probably doesn't mean what you think. I imagine your first instinct upon hearing those words was that the door had a deadbolt, because that's certainly what I assumed. Yeah, that's what I assumed until it was said that the keycard, the security keycard, could override it. So it's not quite a deadbolt, is it? Because a deadbolt can't be opened from the outside. However, as I understand it, that's not how these doors work. To lock the door from the inside, guests would have to turn the handle up and then down to initiate the double lock. What wasn't as well known was that this same thing worked from the outside of the room as well. This meant it was possible for the door to be double locked without actually having been locked from the inside. Oh, okay. Of course, there is a caveat to that. The technique only worked from the outside while a keycard was inserted into the door, and both keycards Jennifer had been given were inside the room. Forensic technicians concluded that it would have been physically impossible for someone else to have entered the room, shot Jennifer, and double-locked the door on the way out. Unless they had access to different keycards that would work on the door, like a staff keycard or some sort of top-secret spy shit to bypass the electronics. Now, let's talk about Jennifer's body. And no, I'm not referring to the 2009 horror comedy starring Megan Fox, for all 5 of you that just made that connection. Definitely didn't. Jennifer was lying on her back on the bed, her legs hanging off the end with her feet on the floor. There was a bullet hole in her forehead with significant blood loss. It was on the mattress, the pillows, the telephone, the walls, and even on the ceiling. Blood had splattered everywhere, or at least almost everywhere. The gun was in Jennifer's right hand, which was resting on her chest, but despite police ruling that the gunshot was self-inflicted, let's take a look at how she was holding the gun. Don't worry, Simon, while I'm going to show you a couple of crime scene photos, there isn't any blood in any of them. In fact, that's one of the problems with this first photo. Well, it looks like there's blood on the gun, but I guess not. Okay, so she's holding it really weird. She's holding it, okay, for audio listeners, she's holding the gun backwards, basically. So it would be like if you're holding it and then you're putting your thumb on the trigger. I suppose that's a way you could hold a gun pointing it towards yourself. It doesn't seem insane. Many of you watching this have used firearms before. I have, and I believe you've mentioned that you have as well, Simon. Yes, many times. Though I may be misremembering that. Regardless, we can hopefully all agree that we've never seen somebody use their thumb to pull the trigger before. I mean, yes, but also you don't have a lot of practice pointing a gun towards yourself. Now, naturally, like in movies, you'd see like this, right? Like the gun brought up to the side of the temple and then pop. Or like under the chin, right? But I could also see someone like holding it with their thumb, like kind of two-handed almost, like pointing it towards themselves. It doesn't seem insane, is what I'm saying. But that's not the only strange thing in this photo. I already said there was blood almost everywhere, including on the ceiling, but there isn't any blood on her hand, on the gun, or on her torso. I know the barrel of the gun might look as if it was dipped in blood, okay? But that's actually tarnish. Oh, okay. It's speculated that the gun was routinely stored in and removed from a leather holster by somebody who didn't take particularly good care of it. Jennifer's thumb was also still holding down the trigger, which shouldn't be possible. When police removed her thumb from the trigger, there was a distinctive click sound, indicating that the trigger had not been released since firing. However, the gun used was a Browning 9mm, also known as a Browning high power, and it's a powerful little handgun. Actually, calling it a little handgun is really selling this weapon short, as the Belgian-manufactured semi-automatic pistol was a favorite among militaries and police forces. These pistols were used by both Axis and Allied forces during World War II, and at one point 50 armies, including nearly all NATO nations, used this as their standard issue sidearm. All of that is to say that this is an extremely powerful and effective weapon. Coincidentally, it's got a whole lot of recoil. Considering the very awkward way that Jennifer was holding the gun, it is believed that the recoil should have knocked it out of her grip. Even if it didn't, her thumb realistically shouldn't have been able to keep the trigger depressed. The muscles relax when a person dies until rigor mortis, but that takes hours to set in. The only way to explain this is an extremely rare and theoretical condition known as a cadaver spasm, in which some of a person's muscles immediately tense after a death instead of relaxing. When this happens, the muscles are even tighter than during rigor mortis, and it's usually restricted to hands. But again, this is a theoretical condition. There's no scientific consensus on whether or not it's a real thing, and no scientific explanation for why it would be the case. In short, it's extraordinarily unlikely that Jennifer could have fired the gun without dropping it when she died, and even less likely that there would be no blood on the hand or the gun. Such an outcome is effectively unheard of. And while we're on the topic of her hands, there was no gunpowder residue either. Okay, like at first I'm kind of like, okay, she could have held the gun weirdly. Maybe the blood just went behind her. Maybe her finger got jammed in there somehow. And then as her body relaxed and then got rigged and stuff, it kind of just became a bit more loose, so it could have popped out when the police found her. But the no gunpowder residue combined with the unlikeliness of that does seem pretty suspicious. That's not necessarily a major red flag by itself, as gunpowder residue can sometimes be unpredictable, but it's extremely suspicious that there isn't any since the gun was fired twice. In addition to the fatal shot, another shot had been fired through a pillow and the mattress, winding up in the concrete floor below. Oddly, the pillow was then turned over to conceal the scorch marks in the fabric from the gun having been fired while directly against it. It was the police's opinion that this had been a test shot, using the pillow as a silencer. There's not really an explanation given for why the test shot would be necessary. If Jennifer was taking her own life, it's not like she had to be concerned that something would go wrong and the gun would hurt her. I would assume someone in that situation would just pull the trigger under the assumption it would work, and if somehow they didn't, then they'd deal with it after. Maybe even take it as a sign from God that they shouldn't be doing this. But the police disagreed. They maintained that she fired the gun into the mattress to test it, then reversed her grip on the gun to aim it at herself and pull the trigger with her thumb. I don't think it's sensible. But also, if you're not like an expert with guns, you might just be like, I'm just going to make sure it works first, because you're not thinking 100% straight or whatever. I don't think that's a bad conclusion. Even if we accept the theory of a test shot and believe this is an accurate account of events, the police must have also believed Jennifer was some sort of sorceress. After all, she accomplished all of that without leaving a single fingerprint on the gun. Oh yes, I guess I hadn't mentioned that part of it yet. The gun, which was found in Jennifer's hand, did not have any fingerprints on it. Neither did the spent shell casings found on the floor, nor did any of the other 7 bullets in the gun's magazine. And that's how they get you. Everyone remembers to wipe down a gun, but they always forget about the bullets and the shell casings. Just like I've never seen somebody use their thumb to pull a trigger, I've never seen somebody load a gun without using their hands. And it's not like Jennifer had burned her fingerprints off or something like that, but we'll come back to that in a moment. Okay, so they've cleaned the bullets and then used gloves to put them into the magazine. Again, not like crazy suspicious, but like pretty weird. There's also one particularly interesting thing about the gun, which is that there was no serial number on it. This wasn't some amateur who filed down the serial number either. Once upon a time, that actually worked, but with modern forensic techniques, those numbers can usually be recovered even after being filed off. In this case, however, the number was removed using acid. It's a more difficult and intricate technique requiring knowledge of exactly how deep into the metal it needs to be dissolved. Forensic analysis was only able to recover a couple of numbers from the barrel of the gun. It was enough to determine that it was manufactured in Belgium in 1990 or 1991, but nothing else. However, even this isn't definitive of the gun's origins. While there's no dispute that the barrel itself is a genuine Browning from the early 1990s, some experts contend that the whole thing is a sort of Franken gun, pieced together from parts of different weapons. They contend that the majority of the gun looks older, likely built with parts from the Hungarian factory FEG. Yeah, a Franken gun, like, made from different parts. That seems like that must be pretty common, right, for making, like, illegal weapons. This factory was making imitation Brownings during the 1960s and 70s, and it's parts from those guns that experts believe comprise the majority of the gun. These FEG knockoffs were heavily used as military weapons, but the market became flooded with them following the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Eastern Bloc in 1989. It was common for parts on military service weapons to be replaced due to wear, hence the appearance of being pieced together from different guns. It's speculated that Jennifer's gun was one of these former service weapons that had the barrel replaced in the early 90s with an authentic Browning barrel. Now, let's go back to the lack of fingerprints found on the gun. There were other items found in the room that had her fingerprints on, such as 3 empty bottles taken from the minibar. Now let's go back to the lack of fingerprints found on the gun. There were other items found in the room that had her fingerprints on, such as 3 empty bottles taken from the minibar. The alcohol was untouched, but somebody had consumed a bottle of Coke, Diet Coke, or Coke Light as it's branded in Norway, and a Sina orange soda. There was also a partially eaten bag of potato chips taken from the minibar as well. But the drinks are a bit strange. It's unclear whether or not there were more than one of each beverage in the minibar, and Simon keeps refusing to fund my time travel research so I can go back to 95 and check. Looking at the contents of various present-day Radisson minibars, it seems that there should be more than one of each soda. If this was the case back in 1995, which certainly seems likely, why would Jennifer have consumed all 3 of the drinks? I don't know if it's not super common to have more than one type of drink in the minibar, I don't think. Because often there'll be like a Diet Coke and a Coke, and if you want the Diet Coke, you'll drink it, and then they assume that by the next day, maybe you want another Diet Coke and they've put it in, or you just go phone down for one. But I don't think that's super unusual. Before I switched to drinking diet soda, I could think of no taste more vile, other than coffee, than the artificial sweeteners that were destroying my favourite caffeinated beverages. But now that I've been drinking diet soda for 20 years, regular soda is just far too sweet for me to handle. And this obviously isn't just me. As a general, people drink diet soda or regular, and that's the end of it. They don't drink both. Does that mean that somebody else was in the room with Jennifer? Perhaps this mysterious Lewis, who nobody except Evie ever saw. Maybe, but there's no evidence of a man staying in the room with Jennifer. The only item found in the room that even suggests a man might have been there was a bottle of men's cologne, which Jennifer's fingerprints were also found on. By itself, that doesn't mean much, though. It's not uncommon for women to use men's cologne or men's deodorant simply because they like the scent more than products designed for women. The cologne was situated on the table directly beside the plate of leftover bratwurst and potato salad, and now we need to talk about food for a moment. The plate of food is a major point of contention in this case, thanks to the autopsy report. According to the autopsy, there was undigested bratwurst in Jennifer's stomach when she died. Food passes through the stomach in 2 to 4 hours, which meant one of 2 things. The first possibility is that Jennifer was murdered nearly 20 hours before she was found, and the gunshot Espen heard was the supposed test shot being used to scare him off so the killer could escape. The idea that she was actually killed much earlier is extremely popular, but let's quash that theory right now. If this was murder, it was clearly professional. There's a lot of really weird stuff going on, but no actual evidence of a murderer. And since that's the case, what the fuck sort of professional killer takes out their target, then just chills in the room as with the dead body for another 20 hours? That's like amateur hour necrophilia nonsense. Even if the killer had to clean the crime scene themselves, I can't imagine it takes more than an hour to tops. Sorry for anybody that tuned in because this is their favorite theory, but I'm dismissing this outright. Yeah, it seems silly. I'm with you, Kevin. I don't know why this would be someone's favorite theory. But if that's not what happens, what about the food? The only other reasonable conclusion is that Jennifer ordered the food and then ignored it for about 24 hours before actually eating it. This seems to be the accepted sequence of events, and it really bothers me because it doesn't make any sense either. Fortunately, I think I have a much more sensible answer. Yeah, no one's like eating... I'm looking at a picture of, like a crime scene picture of the plate of food now, and no one's like... This is not the sort of food that you can leave out for an hour. There's like lettuce and stuff. It's gonna get horrible. According to the autopsy, there were 50 milliliters of undigested bratwurst in Jennifer's stomach. That is an obnoxious unit of measurement to use since bratwurst isn't a liquid, so it really should have been in grams. However, after discussing this thoroughly with a group of scientists, and no, I am not joking, we found a suitable conversion from milliliters to bratwurst. Basically, 50 milliliters of bratwurst is one pretty big bite or two smaller bites. It's essentially a shot glass of brat. Now, do me a favor and look at this photo of Jennifer's leftovers from the crime scene. We're showed on screen right now, but it is showing maybe, I would say, 2/3 of a bratwurst sausage? Maybe? Assuming it wasn't abnormally long, there's about 50 milliliters missing from that brat. I would agree. I think it looks like one big bite or two big bites have been taken. And I'm going to tell you right now, if I ordered bratwurst for dinner and I was brought a plate that had that much green leafy in it and only a single sausage, I'm throwing that plate right in the server's face. Not really, but I would genuinely be pissed off about it. And based on the amount of condiments that appear to have been put on the plate and used up, it seems all but certain that there was more than one bratwurst originally. Yeah, fair play. Although it would be weird to get two bratwursts. If you order a bratwurst, typically you only get one, I think. So... And maybe she used the condiments for like potatoes or something that were on there. It'd be weird to get two bratwursts, I feel. I'd argue that Jennifer ate a brat or two when the food was delivered, but didn't finish her meal. A couple of hours before her death, she got hungry and decided to try a bite or two of the sausage, but decided it was cold and gross, so she didn't finish the rest. Now I'm coming around because that's so logical that I think it does make sense that there would be a second sausage. That's something we can surely figure out. Like whether they served 2 or 1 sausages on the bratwurst in 1995. Actually, that'd be quite difficult. It was a really long time ago. It was like 30 years ago. I'm not the first person to propose that she ate some of it on Friday and tried a little more on Saturday, but I wanted to at least go through my rationale since Jennifer ignoring the food entirely for 24 hours is the most commonly accepted version of events, which is just weird. So what other evidence was found in the room? Next to the bed was a black attaché case. The case was eventually identified as being produced by the German company Braun Buffel sometime between 1986 and 1991. Unfortunately, there's no information about where in the world these cases were sold, which won't help identify where Jennifer might have come from or who she was, nor would the contents of the case help because it was basically empty. There was nothing inside the attaché case except for 25 9mm bullets identical to the ones found inside the gun. That's a lot of bullets to have if you're just planning on offing yourself. If Jennifer was planning to kill herself, as the police determined, she certainly was more than adequately prepared. She was suspiciously prepared. Bringing a single bullet should realistically have been enough, though the gun having a full clip wouldn't be unusual either. But to bring 25 extra rounds is wholly unnecessary. It's not like she had loaded the gun from a box of ammo and there happened to be 25 bullets left in the box either. These were just loose in the briefcase. Whatever Jennifer intended to use her gun for, it seems reasonable to conclude that she believed reloading may have been needed to be a possibility. That wouldn't make any sense if her only target was herself. Or maybe she bought a box of bullets and loaded the gun and then didn't know what else to do with the leftover bullets. Like, can you just throw bullets away? What are you supposed to do with those? So maybe she was like, I don't know what to do with these, and just dump. And she's like, oh, I don't care, I'm going to be dead soon. And just threw them in the bag. I don't think that's unreasonable either. Sorry, Kevin. I'm just trying to pick everything apart. There was another bag in the room as well, a turquoise travel bag by the German company Travel Light. Inside the bag was a pair of black stockings, 3 lace bras, and a black silk top. Between the closet and a shelf in the room were found a sweater, the black leather jacket she was previously seen wearing, a grey blazer, a trench coat, and a sleeveless blouse. Most interesting about these clothes is that nearly all of the labels were removed. Some spy Some were just cut out, but others have been meticulously removed stitch by stitch. Even the brand names inside the shoes was rubbed out completely. The only label that remained was the one that was in the blazer, as that would have been impossible to remove without completely destroying the lining. It's the same reason the travel light bag still had its logo, as cutting it off would have destroyed the bag. Inside the blazer, the label read René Lazard, a German fashion company, though all police were able to find out was that it had been sold in Germany. The only other pieces of evidence in the room were an iron, an ironing board, and a newspaper, though none of these are particularly suspicious. Every guest received a free copy of USA Today at their door each day, which was the newspaper in question. However, the room number on the bag for the paper in Jennifer's room was 2816 rather than 2805. It's possible that whoever delivered the papers either switched those two up by mistake or just didn't pay attention to room numbers in general. After all, everyone got a paper, they were all the same, so who really cares? Yeah, I mean, I imagine they have that because at some hotels in the group, or maybe there's you can specifically request another paper, but if everyone's getting USA Today, then who cares? You just dump them wherever you want them and no one's going to look at the room number or think twice about it. And since Jennifer's room didn't also contain the paper for 2805, it probably didn't mean anything. The only reason it's of note is that the only fingerprint found in the room not belonging to Jennifer is on this newspaper bag. Whether or not the police tried to match the print to whoever delivered the papers that day is unclear, but they didn't get around to shipping it off to Interpol until 2017. This case is still open in 2017? That's 7 years ago. But this happened 30 years ago. Coincidentally, that's the same year that Jennifer's prints were finally sent to Interpol as well, because I guess mysterious deaths aren't a high priority in Norway or something. And if you're wondering, neither print has returned any results yet. As for the ironing board and iron, as I said, the items aren't suspicious. The reason it's noteworthy is there's no record of Jennifer requesting these items or anyone bringing them to the room. There were specific rooms in the hotel designated as ladies' rooms, which always had an iron and an ironing board inside them. The other rooms had a trouser press mounted to the wall, and guests would need to specifically request an iron be brought to them by housekeeping. The trouser press is visible in some of the crime scene photos, meaning that Jennifer was not in a ladies' room and would have had to specifically ask for an iron. Since we know every other time staff went to room 2805 down to the minute, it's unusual that there would be no record of this request. Could have just been left in there by a lazy housekeeper, tucked in the cupboard. Maybe. That covers all the evidence that was in the room, but what about the evidence that wasn't? Obviously, there was no wallet or ID anywhere in the room. If there was, Jennifer's real identity probably wouldn't be a mystery. There were no keys or cash or anything else people typically carry in their pockets either. But lots of other things were expected to be in the room that were not there as well. For example, when Jennifer was found dead on the bed, she was wearing black shoes, black stockings, a black thigh-length cotton jacket, and black silk undershorts. Silk undershorts are basically shorts worn under a dress or a skirt for an extra layer of comfort and possibly modesty. In total, that means Jennifer's room contained 4 jackets, 4 bras, 2 pairs of stockings, a sweater, a blouse, a pair of undershorts, and a single pair of shoes. Hopefully you've realized that there are some noticeable omissions from that list. Despite being checked into the hotel for over 72 hours and expecting to stay for one more night, there wasn't a single pair of panties in Jennifer's room. There also weren't any skirts, pants, or anything else to cover the lower half of the lady's body. Didn't we just say there was a skirt she was wearing? 4 bras, jackets, blouse, pair of undershorts. Oh, no, she wasn't. Okay, yeah, that's weird.
That's weird.
Don't get me wrong, I mean, pants. They're uncomfortable, and I would be happier if I never had to wear them. But since there are laws against that sort of thing, I can't imagine traveling to a hotel for a 4-night stay without bringing a single pair of pants. And we know there should have been at least a garment for her bottom half, because when Kristen brought Jennifer her room service, Jennifer was wearing a dark suit with a skirt that made her look like a flight attendant. Those clothes weren't present in the room, nor were the brightly colored shoes that had previously caught Vigdis's attention. The wheeled suitcase that Kristen had seen was also not in the room. It's unlikely she was mistaken about having seen it in Jennifer's room, as there was no way that all of the clothing in the room could fit inside the single travel light bag. There surprisingly weren't any toiletries in the room either. Hotels obviously provide soap and shampoo, and the ones in the bathroom had been used. A used towel was also tossed on the floor in front of the bathtub, indicating that someone had taken a shower at some point. However, there was no toothbrush, toothpaste, or hairbrush. Maybe you could argue that Jennifer took poor care of her teeth and had short enough hair that she could brush it with her hands, though the word elegant was used to describe her, so I'm not fully convinced that this would have been the case. Regardless, there also wasn't any makeup in the room. This despite the fact that Jennifer was wearing eyeliner when her body was found. Considering it had been 33 hours since her keycard was last used to enter the room, this would have meant that Jennifer put eyeliner on somewhere else 33 hours earlier. The idea that her eyeliner wouldn't have faded over that long of a time is a bit hard to believe, especially since she appears to have showered and washed her hair during that time period. However, there were other things missing from the room than just physical objects. It's pretty clear I'm of the opinion that Jennifer didn't kill herself, but there wasn't evidence of another person either. Not only that, but there wasn't evidence of a struggle. There were no defensive wounds on her body, and the bullet that pierced her skull went straight through the mattress beneath her head, indicating that her body had not been moved. That also indicates the police believe she shot herself in the forehead while lying down and holding the gun with that bizarre grip, and that her hand wound up resting neatly on her chest, still holding the gun. It's all very weird, and while many of the suspicious details indicate that this was likely a murder, there's no evidence in the room for any of that. We're going to have to dig deeper if there's any hope of uncovering the truth about Jennifer Fergate. There's so much weird going on here. Like, it's really weird. Like, some of the stuff I can believe happened, and then some of the stuff like, where's her trousers? She doesn't have any pants. The investigation. Since the police ruled that Jennifer's death wasn't a homicide, most of the investigation was conducted independently. Much of this was done by journalist Lars Christian Wegner from Verdensgang newspaper, or VG. VG is the largest newspaper in Norway, and while it's often described as a tabloid, as far as I can tell, is a genuine, respected source of news. Some of the first things looked at were information provided by Jennifer and her activities in the hotel. She ordered 2 pay TV programs during her stay, one Friday and one Saturday. Unfortunately, there was no record of what channel she watched or in what language, so this isn't particularly helpful. Although police weren't taking this seriously as a murder, they did look into 2 phone numbers that Jennifer had called from her room. Both numbers were in Belgium, as they differed by only a single digit. Coincidentally, neither number actually existed, so no phone call took place. The fact that the numbers differed by only 1 digit suggests that Jennifer was trying to contact someone but failed. Maybe she'd memorized a phone number but could no longer remember it, or maybe she had a phone number written down but it was difficult to read. If it was the latter case, I would think that she would have made more than 2 attempts, but that's just personal speculation. Perhaps she was dialing random Belgian numbers so that the calls would show up on her bill to help establish her as a Belgian woman doing ordinary Belgian things in Oslo. And that brings us back to her registration card, which I'll show you again, since I know you're not going to scroll back 15 pages to find it. Thank you, Kevin. I'm looking at it right now. It'll also be on the screen. The address is listed as 148 Rue de la Stade, 7968 in Verlaine in Belgium. This may come as a shock to you, but no such address exists. Rue de la Stade is not a real street in Verlaine. The only name close was Rue de la Station, but the numbers on that street only go to 100. The postal code is also incorrect for Verlaine. 7968 is the postal code for Felso Martin in Hungary. The proper code would be 4537. I'm sure 7968 is like, postal codes in Europe are not all on the same system. So 7968 is probably a postal code for a lot of places in Europe. Lars travelled to Verlaine to speak with the mayor and others about Jennifer. There was no record of Jennifer or Lois Fergate ever existing in the town, and not a single person recognised her picture. Verlaine is a small town of only about 4,000 people, so if Jennifer had spent any time there, then it's almost certain someone would have recognised her picture. The phone number Jennifer gave also didn't exist, nor was it the correct area code for Verlaine. That number did exist in 2 nearby area codes, and 068 was an area code for the French part of Belgium, but everything was just a little bit off. There's also the company she worked for, listed as Service, but no such company exists. The only company I could find that existed with the name Service in its name is Service Ceramics out of Australia. Wow, Service doesn't seem like an uncommon combination of letters. There's no companies called Service. Interesting. However, it's possible that this part was a mistake. After all, whoever took Jennifer's name down over the phone spelled her fake last name wrong, so perhaps this was a miscommunication as well. Service does exist as an initialism for civil engineering research-based initiatives and services, so perhaps this was what was meant to be listed as an occupation rather than as an employer. It would certainly make a great cover story for a fake identity, as civil engineering research is sufficiently boring enough and technical enough that it wouldn't result in a lot of follow-up questions. Then there's the date of birth, which was disputed following the autopsy. While a listed birth date would have made her 21, the coroner believed Jennifer to be about 30, give or take 5 years. They also did a toxicology screening during the autopsy, but unfortunately it was all very minimal. All that was tested for was the presence of alcohol in Jennifer's blood, of which there was none. Her blood was not tested for drugs, the kind that might have sedated her so that a killer could shoot her in the head without her fighting back. They also didn't scrape under Jennifer's fingernails to see if maybe she had scratched an attacker, nor did they conduct any tests to see if she had been sexually assaulted, or even had consensual sex for that matter. Normally, I wouldn't consider consensual sex to be any of our business, but since one of the theories is that she's a high-end sex worker, it could have been theoretically relevant. DNA testing was still new at the time, and not uncommon, but a sample of Jennifer's blood was stored in case it could be used to later build a DNA profile. Unfortunately, that sample was later discarded, something that happens with most of the evidence. Oh no, don't do that. The hotel tossed the bloody bedspread and mattress in the trash just hours after the police left. 2 months after Jennifer was buried, an assistant chief of police decided it was time to throw out all the other evidence. The only things that weren't thrown out were a diving watch, a gold earring, and the gold ring on her hand in the photo with the gun. Those were instead sold at police auction. What the fuck? What? Like, keep the blood? You've got giant warehouses of this for, like, crimes, no? The autopsy did reveal that Jennifer had expensive dental work done in both gold and porcelain. Unfortunately, that was a dead end, as both materials were common across multiple countries as well as the US. So, if forensics isn't going to help, what about witnesses? Could anybody have seen anything? Well, sure, all the security cameras probably could have been used to answer if there was a man staying with Jennifer, if she visited other rooms in the hotel, or a whole host of other questions. They could have, but they can't now. Because police were 99.9% confident that Jennifer had killed herself, 0.1% uncertainty wasn't deemed reason enough to ask the hotel for their security tapes. At the time Lars got involved investigating the case, the tapes had long since been deleted. As for other people, there weren't a lot of help either, not that the police even asked. The hotel's records from 1995 were long gone before Lars started poking around, but he was able to identify some of the other hotel guests from copies of documents that had been saved. For the most part, the story was the same from everyone. They hadn't heard a thing. They never saw Jennifer or anybody else enter or leave the room. They had no idea that anything was wrong until they saw the police tape blocking off the door. Only one guest reported hearing anything, but she was several rooms down the hall, and the noises she heard were hours apart from when the bullet was fired. Seeing as she didn't claim to hear the gunshot, whatever she heard was likely unrelated. And unfortunately, police never came to speak with whoever was staying in room 2816, and those records are all long gone. I'm not convinced the incorrect newspaper in Jennifer's room was anything other than the result of an employee giving her the wrong paper, but for completion's sake, I figured I'd mention that person's identity remains a mystery. However, there was one very interesting person staying in the hotel at the same time as Jennifer. Directly across the hall, with a perfect view of Jennifer's door, was a man Lars only identified as Mr. F because he was from the French part of Belgium. Though potentially a coincidence, it is still interesting that it's the same general area as Jennifer's fake address. After an incessant amount of badgering that probably would have gotten him shot if this was the United States, there were multiple visits to Mr. F's home. Lars was also finally able to get him on the phone to talk about what happened in Oslo. Mr. F was in Oslo on business, and he stayed in the room from Friday to Saturday. When asked if he stayed at the hotel in 1995, Mr. F said yes, and then he went on, "There was a woman who died, wasn't there? I remember it well because they asked me about it at the front desk when I checked out. Someone asked if I'd heard or seen anything, since it was in the same corridor. But I slept well that night and knew nothing about it." Why is this suspicious? It's just a dude also in the hotel. Lars found this response to be extremely interesting. Okay then, not only because Mr. F volunteered this information without him needing to bring up Jennifer's death, but because Mr. F checked out of the hotel before she had even died. Wait, so he's talking about the death. What? What?
What? I do not understand.
He left Saturday morning, and she didn't die until Saturday night. So how could the hotel have asked during Mr. F's checkout about the death of a woman who was still alive at the time? Unsurprisingly, Mr. F didn't have an answer to that question, and the conversation was over. That is mad suspicious. It's an interesting development, but I do think there's some important context to this. When the phone call took place, Mr. F was inside his home where he'd been receiving a stream of letters, messages, and business cards slipped under the door. During the call, Lars was standing outside of the house for the second day. I don't think it's unreasonable to consider that any statement made by Mr. F was done with the explicit purpose of getting Lars off his fucking property. The statement is still noteworthy, I'm just not sure how reliable of a witness Mr. F actually is. The final details came from later testing done in 2017. Jennifer's body was exhumed in late 2016 in the hopes of unlocking the truth about her past. DNA samples were taken, as well as a tooth to be used to determine her exact age. A nearly complete DNA profile was able to be created, which has shown her to be of European ancestry, not a huge surprise. More specifically, she was definitely not Scandinavian and probably Eastern European, with a high likelihood of her being born in East Germany. Her age was able to be determined using the most accurate method known, and both her stated age and the coroner's guess were incorrect. You're probably familiar with radiocarbon dating, also referred to as carbon dating or carbon-14 dating. This uses the amount of carbon-14 found in a sample to determine its age. This is great for archaeology, since the half-life of carbon-14 is 5,730 years, but it doesn't seem like it'd be terribly useful for people born recently. However, nuclear bombs changed all that. Nuclear tests caused a major spike in carbon-14 in the atmosphere, which has slowly been going back down. Tooth enamel forms when we're still fetuses, and once it's formed, the content of carbon-14 in the enamel doesn't ever change. I mean, other than the eventual radioactive decay that takes thousands of years. That means that by measuring the content of carbon-14 in the tooth enamel of a person born after nuclear testing began and comparing it to atmospheric levels, a person's year of birth can be identified with incredible precision. That's really cool. Using this technique, it was determined that Jennifer was actually 24 years old when she died. I know it probably feels like I've obsessed over every minor detail in this case, and maybe I have, but that's all of the evidence there is. It's now time to look at the theory, though I'm very curious what your initial theory is, Simon. I don't know. I want to say suicide, but then there's also way too much weird going on. It can't be suicide. So it's got to be murder. And then, God, I don't know. I feel like spy murder, maybe? Murder of a spy, maybe she was a spy, something like that. The theories. I'm going to ignore a lot of fringe theories and focus on a few major ones. First up, Jennifer was killed by Louis Fergate. It's hard to give this theory any weight since nobody but Evie ever saw a man with Jennifer. Hotel staff were in the room multiple times and they saw Jennifer and her belongings, but nobody else was ever seen in the room, nor did staff see evidence of a male companion. While evidence does suggest that somebody else was involved in Jennifer's death, there's nothing to suggest that it was a person that actually came to the hotel with her. The next theory is that it was Mr. F. Did Lars catch him in a lie, accidentally outing himself as a murderer? Or even if he wasn't the person to pull the trigger, was he somehow in on it? Maybe, but it's not super convincing. To start, the conversation happened over 20 years after Jennifer's death. It's easy to misremember stuff after that period of time, since it stayed at the hotel the day before she died. Maybe he had told the story to people in the past and added some personal embellishments to make the story more interesting. Yeah, entirely possible. Were that the case, and he had done so for years, it would be easy for him to have forgotten that he was never actually asked about the death at checkout, or as I alluded to earlier, maybe he wanted Lars to infer that he was capable of murder. Dude had been coming to his door for 2 days, and maybe deliberately slipping up like this would finally scare Lars off his lawn. Just make you casually believe that you're a murderer. It's yeah, that'd be weird, wouldn't it, Lars? That person who annoyed me ended up dead, Lars. Interesting theory, isn't it, Lars? Get off my lawn! I'm not saying it's impossible for Mr. F to be involved. Maybe it really was a mistake and he'd revealed too much information. And if somebody killed Jennifer, then why not Mr. F? It's not like a more compelling suspect has appeared in this story yet. However, seeing as the only evidence tying Mr. F specifically to the crime was a vague statement made 20 years after the fact and arguably under duress, I'm not sold. Yeah, me neither, not at all. So what about the police's theory? Could Jennifer actually kill herself? Did she meticulously wipe down her gun and ammunition to remove her fingerprints from them before picking up the gun without gloves to fire a test shot and then shoot herself without getting new fingerprints on the gun? I think we've gone over the evidence in enough detail that this seems extremely implausible, but who knows, maybe you disagree with me and think nobody else was involved. Nah, it's too suspicious. There's definitely something weird going on. Of course, that wouldn't answer the question of where all their stuff went. The wheeled suitcase and her other clothes were in the room when Kristen brought room service. And that was already 9 hours after the last time Jennifer's keycard was used. Did she load the bag full of clothes and makeup and toss it out the window? The window of her room was found ajar, so maybe that's possible, but it's also the sort of thing that somebody probably would have made a note of. It's not every day that luggage gets thrown from the 28th floor of the city's finest hotel. I'm not going to say it's impossible that Jennifer took her own life, but no, actually I am. Anybody who thinks she did is more than welcome to yell at me in the comments, but I believe this is genuinely impossible based on the available evidence. I don't think it's impossible, I just think it's extremely unlikely. I did mention earlier that one of the theories was that Jennifer was a high-end sex worker. So is that at all possible? Sure, at least on the surface. It does explain some of the stranger things, like why she would extend her stay by 2 nights and then not return to her room until 24 hours later. Maybe somebody in a different room in the hotel had wanted to pay her for a full-day girlfriend experience with overnight. It could also account for some of the unexplained trips out of her room that lasted no more than a few hours each, though both of those were in the morning, and I don't think 8 to 11 a.m. is peak business hours for sex workers, but hey, maybe it was international travelers who hadn't adjusted to the time difference yet. But if this all was the case, wouldn't she probably have had more trips out of her room? Or if she was having guests come to her room, wouldn't the bed have appeared more used? It also seems likely that somebody would have seen or heard something under these circumstances, and if they didn't hear anything, then clearly her clients were doing it wrong. Even if she was a sex worker, which only seems barely more likely than she killed herself, it doesn't explain how she died. Are we to believe that by mere coincidence she was murdered by a client who had all the skills to do this without leaving a trace and also felt inclined to steal a bunch of her personal belongings? Oh, and he also knew how to make the door appear double-locked after he left. This part about the door could be explained if Lars John was a member of the hotel staff, but it still doesn't explain all the other stuff. And if the killer was hotel staff, in all likelihood there'd have been a lot more bodies showing up dead in the hotel. That just brings us to the final theory. It's a theory that in most cases would be listed among the ridiculous theories only included so I could crack a few jokes, and yet with Jennifer it genuinely seems like the most probable. The final theory is that Jennifer Fergate was a spy, or at least she worked for some secret intelligence agency. Yeah, kind of feels pretty spy-y, doesn't it? I mean, that's the problem with saying she's a spy is there aren't very many spies. So, like, statistically, not very possible. But look at all the weird...
I'm a spy.
Admittedly, I am not a spy. At least that's what I want you to think. There also aren't readily available PDFs of classified secret intelligence operating procedures, and I don't expect that to ever change. At least not unless War Thunder releases an espionage expansion. God, that is a niche reference. As such, all I can do is rely on the word of experts. In this case, much of that expert analysis comes from Ola Kildaga, former head of E14, a covert section of the Norwegian intelligence service. And based on the analysis, a lot of Jennifer's story lines up with covert operations. To start, there's the fake name and address and all of that, as well as the failure to process any identification. While Sasha may have been telling the truth about this sort of thing happening all the time, Jennifer also could have slipped him a few hundred kroner to stop him asking so many bloody questions. Removing labels from clothing and things is also common among spies. In the event something goes wrong, there should be as little evidence to possibly trace the person back to their country of origin. Many brands aren't available across the entire world, or at least weren't back in 1995 when internet shopping sucked, so removing the labels was a simple precaution. The manner in which the serial number was removed from the gun also screams of professional involvement as well. It could have been removed by a highly skilled criminal just as easily as by secret intelligence, but the careful use of acid to destroy the serial number showed that it was somebody who really knew what they were doing. It also gives possible explanations to Jennifer's sudden disappearance from the hotel for an entire day. It's common for spies to have to alternate locations to stay when they're abroad, kind of like a safe house. She may have spent the day at such locations in meetings, or possibly returned to an alternate location after a mission to clean up and whatnot before returning to the hotel. If secret intelligence was involved, it also explains why the scene was staged so professionally. The locked door wouldn't have been an impediment for intelligence organizations, and undoubtedly they would have known how to make the door appear double-locked after leaving. Of course, none of this explains why there weren't any signs of a struggle. Most likely, there was some sort of sedative involved, but it's a matter of how it was administered. Was the killer known to Jennifer and perhaps someone she trusted? Perhaps they could have drugged one of her drinks. It would also explain why there were 2 sugary drinks and 1 diet drink. It wouldn't explain why they killed her, but maybe one of them was a double agent or something, who knows. If the killer was assigned to take Jennifer out and wasn't someone she knew, perhaps they were able to sneak up on her and inject her with a sedative before too much of a fight broke out. It's not like something as small as a needle puncture would have shown up in the rather half-assed autopsy, and if she had scratched her attacker in defense, well, we'd have no way to know since that wasn't checked for. Getting out of the room seems like it could have been a problem, and maybe here's where the killer got a bit lucky. The gunshot scared Espen away, and the door was left unattended for 15 minutes. While this was framed by security as only 15 minutes that the door was unguarded, it would take less than 15 seconds for someone to walk out the door, and since hotel doors have peepholes, the killer would have known whether or not someone was going to see him. This also potentially explains what the police ruled a test shot. It's possible that the murder had already taken place and the killer was finishing cleaning up and staging the scene. When the knock at the door interrupted them, they fired through the pillow, hoping it would scare the person off so they could escape. They then quickly put the gun in Jennifer's hand, grabbed the wheeled suitcase and got the hell out of there once the coast was clear, or maybe they did some crazy spy shit out of the window, but it was 28 stories up with no balcony, so I'm gonna say no to that. The haste with which the killer had to leave could explain the bizarre grip Jennifer had on the gun. I think a professional wouldn't have done something so strange even when in a hurry, but it's not a situation I've ever been in, so who can say? As for why the second bullet was shot through the pillow, it was supposed to look like she killed herself. It's pretty rare for somebody to shoot themselves in the head twice, and there's a good chance that forensics would have known that the second was a post-mortem injury. Perhaps the most important piece of evidence to suggest Jennifer was a spy is that nobody had come forward to identify the body. She was only 24 when she died, and sketches of her have been widely distributed for decades. These aren't mediocre sketches based on a vague description either. They are pictures of Jennifer from the crime scene and the autopsy that were used as basis for the sketches, so they definitely look like her. Whether it was family, friends, or co-workers, realistically, anybody should have recognized her, and yet nobody has ever come forward. Ola had a simple explanation for this seemingly bizarre detail of the case. While nations often request bodies of deceased agents to be returned for burial, if it was someone working in covert ops, that's usually not the case. The family would be informed in vague terms what happened, be paid enough to never have to worry about money again, and be instructed to never report the person missing or say what happened. Something like, your daughter died a hero to our nation, here's $10 million, never speak of her again. Does that really happen? Does that really happen? It's $10 million? God damn. You'd just be like, oh shit, I thought she worked in like IT. As some mother from the CIA shows up. And where something like this the case, everything suggests that people who knew Jennifer's real identity would know to keep their mouths shut anyway. All signs point to her being German, particularly East German. Being 24 years old in 1995 meant that she would have grown up in the communist-controlled Eastern Bloc. While organizations like the Stasi and the KGB officially ceased to exist after the fall of communism, that doesn't mean there weren't still supporters. The existence of underground radicalized groups is all but certain, and if Jennifer had been a true believer in communism, then perhaps she fell in with the wrong crowd. In this case, it would be to the benefit of everyone that knew Jennifer, not just family members that may have been paid off to keep their damn mouths shut about what they knew. The communist ties are more speculative than the idea of her being an intelligence in general, but I don't think it's worth ignoring entirely. One final detail of all of this is that the Oslo Plaza Hotel was no stranger to secret intelligence. The Oslo Accords were signed in September of 1993, but the hotel had played host to many secret negotiations both before and after the Accords were signed. While these were taking place, it was common for professional bodyguards and secret intelligence to be all over the hotel. None that ever resulted in bloodshed, but it doesn't mean this couldn't have been something similar. According to Ola, Norway, Sweden, and Austria were big destinations for these types of secret intelligence meetings. He didn't specifically know of anything taking place in May or June of 1995, but that doesn't mean that such meetings couldn't have been taken place. Yeah, there's like spy meetings. They're not going to be like super on the books. Wrap up. So, who really was Jennifer Fergate? Was she just a sad woman who wanted to enjoy a few free nights at Oslo's fanciest hotel before ending her life, like the police thought? Or was she a communist spy taken out by adversarial forces? Or maybe just a regular spy instead of a communist one? I think she was just a spy. I think she was a spy and she got taken out. Unfortunately, we don't have the answers for you today, but that doesn't mean the answer will never be known. If Jennifer was still alive, she'd only be 53 right now. Most of the people who knew her probably are still alive and well, so there's no reason for anyone to say anything. But as those people age, especially her parents, assuming they're still alive, there's always the chance for a deathbed confession. Barring that, there's still the full DNA profile of Jennifer. There isn't anyone specific to match it against to confirm her identity, but eventually there will be a match found. It's only a matter of time before somebody with a shared ancestor to Jennifer uploads their DNA to GED Match and opts in to allowing law enforcement to use their profile to help solve crimes. Once that happens, it'll be off to the races. I'm curious or not whether you agree with my conclusion that she was associated with secret intelligence, Simon. I do, Kevin. We've had like a few points of like disagreement or like weird one-sided discussion, but I think this is the answer. I think she was a spy. I recognize the script is a bit more biased than I would normally like, but most of the theories just seem so absurdly unlikely to me that I couldn't properly humor them in an impartial fashion as I normally would. But once Jennifer's true identity is finally revealed, I really hope it turns out she was a communist. Spy stories are always more fun when the Soviets are involved. And that's where we end today's video. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.